Good evening. On behalf of Metrolinx, welcome to our 11th virtual open house for the Yonge North Subway extension. Tonight's conversation will focus on the updated environmental studies for the project. You will find them in the recently released Environmental Project Report Addendum, or as you will hear it referred to many times tonight, the EPR Addendum. The report is available for you to read on metrolinxengage.com/Yonge Subway EXT, and you have until March 14th, which is next Monday, to submit your comments to be included in the final report. My name is James Moore, and I'm a Senior Communications Advisor for Metrolinx, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening. Now, that means my job is to keep this event on time, to make sure your questions are answered fully, and that as many of your questions are answered as possible within the time that we have available. Now, our schedule will wrap up at 8:30 tonight. Now, it's not too late to submit your questions to our panel, either through the form on the webpage you're viewing this video stream on right now, or if you have the latest version of the Zoom app on your phone or computer, you can click the yellow Join Zoom button below this video window. Now, on the other side, you'll find our Allie McHugh, and she'll be looking for you to raise your digital hand, and when the time is right, she'll tell you to unmute your microphone, and everyone at this meeting will be able to hear you and your question. Now, we'll do our very best to answer as many questions live as we can, but remember that we'll post the responses to each and every one of them on this webpage after the event is over, as soon as we can. Now, you can also get in touch with us anytime via phone, email, or social media. You'll find our contact information on metrolinxengage.com, and we will share it at the end of the slideshow presentation too. We have closed captioning available for tonight's event, so if you'd like to turn the captions on, just move your mouse to the bottom of your video window, and you should see a white box icon with a CC in the middle. You can click on that icon to turn on the closed captioning. Now, let us take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers and immigrants in this generation or generations past. Metrolinx declares its commitment to building meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge the historic and continued impacts of colonialization and the need to work towards meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on lands covered by 20 treaties, and that we have a responsibility to recognize and value the rights of Indigenous nations and peoples and conduct business in a manner that is built on the foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. Now, let's take a moment to think about safety. Safety is at the core of everything we do here at Metrolinx, and as I'm sure you've noticed, the weather is getting milder. We've got days that typically reach above zero, and signs that spring's around the corner. It was a beautiful sunny day today. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that the nights it still gets below zero. So if you're walking, driving, riding your bike, it doesn't really matter. You need to be especially careful because black ice is all over the place. We've had lots of snow this winter. It melts in the daytime, freezes overnight, and often what can look like clean pavement or a puddle might be ice, or even worse, ice with some water on top. So what you can do, don't rush. I think we all convince ourselves that we need to get places and do things quicker than we really need to, and just be really aware if you're driving or if you're out running errands. Leave yourself a little extra braking distance, some time to slow down. And if you're at home, just keep salting the steps outside, the walkways, even if they might look like they don't need it. And this is definitely a do as I say, not as I do situation. I unfortunately took a bit of a spill this week. I was heading home on Tuesday morning and was walking through a patch that I knew might be icy. And sure enough, when I looked, I thought, it's fine. It's just going to be a puddle. Splat. I was really lucky. I didn't knock my head, just a bit of whiplash on my neck, but we're so close. We've trudged through a really cold, snowy winter, and we've got light at the end of the tunnel at the end of the pandemic. So let's stay safe, let's stay healthy, and let's just be in good shape to enjoy the really good spring and summer weather that we've got just around the corner. So let's go ahead now and move the slideshow one slide ahead so that we can take a look at our timeline, please. So we have held 3 open house events since the release of the new environmental report, and our experts have been sharing the findings of those studies and taking your feedback along the way. And as you can see, we've broken down all of the various study topics into 2 presentations, one for the underground segment of the route, which goes from Finch Station in North York to the tunnel portal near Langstaff Road in Markham. The second presentation is for the surface level segment, which is north of the portal until about 16th Avenue. Now, our first open house focused on the EPR addendum gives an overview of the entire study, and you can find all of the presentations archived on Metrolinx Engage, so you can read them anytime and stream the video feed to catch up on anything you might have missed. All you have to do is click on the Live Events tab on Metrolinx Engage and mouse over the Past Events button. Now, tonight's open house will be all about revisiting the most popular topics we've been asked about so far and sharing what we've heard from you as we've reached out for input on the study. And remember, you have until next Monday, March 14th, to submit your comments to have them included in the final environmental assessment report. Now, before I introduce our experts and dive into the presentation, I want to tell you more about what you can expect from us and tonight's event. So we'll begin with our presentation and follow it up by answering some of the most popular written questions sent into Metrolinx Engage. Then we'll head down to Ali in our interactive Zoom room lounge, where she will relay some of your questions live. Go ahead and scroll down right now if you can through the questions that have already been submitted before you post your own. And if you spot one that covers what you want to hear more about, click on the little thumbs up icon to vote it up to the top of the list. If you'd like to ask a question, but maybe you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can post it in the Zoom room chat box and Ali will share it with the panel. And we'll take call-in questions on a first-come, first-served basis, and we'll use the number of votes to help pick the written questions that we answer live. We'll keep each question and answer to 3 minutes so that we can get as many of them in as we can within the time that we have to spend together tonight. And if you've just joined us, this event is closed captioned. You can turn on the captions by clicking the CC icon in the bottom right corner of your video. We would like to welcome the elected representatives who are viewing the event this evening. Mayor Frank Scarpitti of Markham is watching, and for any other elected officials watching the broadcast, we welcome you as well, and we thank you for your interest. Now, on behalf of the panel, we look forward to a productive and positive conversation. We, of course, appreciate the time you've taken out of your day to connect with us, and we want you to know that we truly value the relationships we're building with you and the communities we serve. Now it's time to meet tonight's panel of project experts. First, we've got Stephen Collins. He is the program sponsor for the Yonge North Subway Extension. Charlie Hong is the project director for 1T Plus, our technical advisor on this project. Also with 1T Plus is Kevin Coulter. He's a senior environmental planner. If you have streamed or maybe attended one of these sessions before, you've been welcomed warmly by Leona Hollingsworth. She's our Director for Community Engagement for the 905 region. Maria Zinchenko is the star of our show this evening. She's our Manager of Environmental Programs and Assessments and is going to guide you through the environmental study and revisit the topics you've been asking about the most. 2 Marias on the show tonight. Maria Doyle is a Metrolinx Manager for Property Acquisitions, and she'll be able to answer your property-related questions. Sam Kalendrin is the acoustical consultant with 1T Plus. He's an expert in noise and vibration. And Ali McHugh and Zara Hakim are with the Yonge North Subway Extension Community Engagement Team. They'll be hosting in the Zoom room and working with me to take your questions to the panel. So if we could move the slideshow ahead 1 slide, please, I will hand it over to my colleague, Stephen Collins, to get the presentation underway. Stephen, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, James, and good evening, everyone. And as James has thanked you, I too want to send my sincere thanks and appreciation to each and every one of you for taking the time out of your evening and joining us here tonight. This, as James said, is our 4th of 4 open houses on the EPR addendum, and we're going to get into really responding back to the things that we've heard so far and answering those questions that were coming up the most frequently over the last 3 meetings. I always like to start our presentations with why we're doing this project in the first place and why each level of government has been so adamant and so supportive of the project from the beginning. It is one of those transit projects that completes the missing link between York Region and downtown Toronto along the Yonge subway line. And it is an 8-kilometer extension Within our project scope so far, we have 4 confirmed stations, with 2 additional stations being discussed between the various levels of government. The advantages of the project are not only to the future communities that are going to be moving into the area, but there are real advantages and benefits to the existing communities and all of those people who are using transit and road services along Yonge Street to access the places where they want to go. The project really will connect by subway Finch Station up to Richmond Hill Centre, giving all of those people who are using buses to access the subway service today a real travel time savings, bringing 22 minutes each way back to their day to put into more productive use that they can spend with family, friends, and doing the activities that they find more enjoyable rather than commuting. And we're also doing the project because environmentally it makes sense. It's reducing vehicle kilometers traveled from the road, helping to manage congestion in the rapidly growing areas of Southern York region. And it will really provide benefits to the existing communities and the communities that will be coming over the next 50 to 75 years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maria to take us through the first few slides on the Environmental Project Report Addendum. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. First, I wanted to give a quick recap of what environmental assessment process is and an overview of the environmental assessment process for the Yonge North Subway Extension project. So environmental assessment is a process to identify potential environmental effects of a proposed project. It is completed ahead of construction to identify potential effects on the environment in ways they can be addressed during construction and operation. This work is documented in an environmental project report or environmental project report addendum. The Yonge North Subway Extension Environmental Project Report was released in 2009, and that report assessed the project alignment that extended from Finch Station to Richmond Hill Centre underground along Yonge Street corridor. That report was followed by an addendum in 2014, which looked at the train storage facility for the project. And since those two reports, the 2009 and 2014 one, a number of project design changes have been proposed, which are all assessed in our current 2022 addendum report. At a very high level, these are surface segment of the project and changes to stations, bus facilities, emergency exit buildings, and the train storage facility. We've covered the changes in more detail as part of the very first open house that we held on February 17th. And of course, you can find a lot more information about this in the addendum report itself, which is available on the website. The addendum report is developed through 3 main steps, and the overview of these can be seen on the slide. First, we characterize existing environmental conditions. Second, we identify potential effects, mitigation measures, and monitoring requirements. And third, we make updates and refinements to the addendum based on the feedback we received during the review period that we're currently in. Thorough understanding of existing environmental conditions is an extremely important first step and the very foundation of environmental assessment. And to achieve this, our team collected and reviewed available information from many environmental aspects. We also completed field surveys, and some of you may have actually seen our staff out in your neighborhoods collecting data, like perhaps taking photos of heritage properties or doing an inventory of the local vegetation. We identify the effects the project may have on the environment by overlaying existing conditions information, project scope, and anticipated construction activities. We've identified potential effects of both construction and operation of the extension. And using industry best practices and current regulatory requirements, we then identified measures to avoid or reduce potential impacts. We also identified monitoring requirements to confirm effectiveness of those measures. I want to note that the addendum is a binding document, and implementation of mitigation measures and monitoring requirements is a condition of project environmental approval. These requirements are also included in our contract documents, and we make sure that they're adhered to during construction and operation of the project. And the last major step in the addendum development is seeking and responding to your feedback in the forthcoming updates that we will be making to the report. We've notified local communities along the alignment, community groups, municipalities, review agencies, Indigenous nations of the addendum publication. And in the next slide, we will cover how and when the feedback can be submitted and the next step in the addendum process. So here we go, the addendum review process. The addendum was published on February 10th, and we're nearing the end of the public review period. Public review period closes on March 14th, which is the upcoming Monday. So that would be the last day. You can submit comments, and then we will take all your comments and feedback and make refinements and updates to the addendum report and publish what we call updated addendum on April 16th or earlier. And those who were notified of the February 10th publication of the addendum will be notified of the updated addendum publication. Updated addendum publication kicks off Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks Minister's review period, which may take up to 35 days. Comments can be submitted to the project email directly, and we also have online feedback forms available on Metrolinx Engage website. Next slide, please. Now, we'd like to spend a bit of time to cover topics we received most questions about during the past 3 virtual open houses and through our website and project email. First, we will cover several noise and vibration topics. Specifically, we will cover how noise and vibration levels associated with train operations in the tunnels were presented in the report and what those results mean. We will also talk about vibration levels during tunneling activities and how noise will be mitigated along the surface segment of the subway extension. And then we'll switch gears to natural environment and revisit vegetation removal and species at risk. Next slide, please. Thank you. To illustrate how noise and vibration assessment results were presented, I will use a noise and vibration receptor along segment 2 of the project that we called R40. R40 is a low-rise residential property or a single-family home in the Royal Orchard neighborhood that is located right along a stretch of the alignment that curves towards the CN rail tracks. The detailed mapping is available in the noise and vibration report, and I encourage anybody who's interested in this to explore the report. Because this location is in close proximity to the alignment and would be sensitive to both ground-borne noise and vibration from trains operating in the tunnels, it was included as one of the representative locations in our assessment. Do want to note that properties further away from this point and other receptors we looked at in the assessment would be subject to less impacts. And if noise and vibration levels are reduced at this and other representative locations, nearby locations, but further away from the alignment, would have even lower impacts, or lower noise and vibration levels, rather. First, sorry, can we go back to, thank you. First, we used predictive models to determine ground-borne noise and vibration levels with the project. So with trains operating in the tunnels, but without mitigation. Modeling approach is conservative. So for example, we assumed that the soils along the project propagate vibration very efficiently, though in reality, this level of efficient vibration propagation is very unlikely to occur. For R40, vibration was predicted to be 0.22 millimeters per second. And you can see that value in the yellow box in the snapshot on the top. Groundborne noise was predicted to be 55 dBA, and that can be seen in the green box. We then compared these values with the guideline limits that we're following. So for vibration, we have 0.1 millimeters per second, and for groundborne noise, we have 35 dBA. And these values are also listed in the tables. Vibration-related values are highlighted in yellow and groundborne noise highlighted in green. The difference between predicted value and guideline limit is the impact. And this is what mitigation measures will need to reduce to get us to the guideline limit. For segment 2, guideline limits predicted values without mitigation and impacts are presented in table B44 of the report. And if you happen to be looking at the report and you scroll down, you'll see table B45, a snapshot of which is shown at the bottom of the slide. This table presents the necessary reductions in vibration and groundborne noise levels to achieve the guideline limits, as well as mitigation solutions that could provide those reductions. I just want to note that for an apples to apples comparison, we converted vibration from millimeters per second to dBA. And in the updated report, we will also carry millimeters per second values over for clarity. You can see that at R40, we need to achieve a 20 dBA reduction to meet the groundborne noise limit. And we need to achieve a 7 dBA reduction to meet vibration limit. Because the groundborne noise reduction is substantially higher than vibration reduction, a solution that would achieve the groundborne noise reduction will make vibration levels imperceptible or below the guideline limit. Floating slab track is a solution that is expected to reduce groundborne noise levels not only to the guideline limit, but substantially below it. Floating slab track is one of the most effective solutions for groundborne noise and vibration reduction and has been used extensively on the local TTC network and other subway systems. Modern floating slab configurations like the double tie floating slab can achieve reductions of more than 25 and as high as about 30 dB. And this will give us groundborne noise levels below 30 dB and imperceptible vibration levels at R40 and other single-family residential properties we will be tunneling under in Royal Orchard. And Metrolinx will make this binding commitment explicit in their updated addendum. Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at the vibration levels from tunneling activities. Tunneling activities with most potential for vibration are tunnel boring machines digging the tunnels and temporary service trains transporting excavated soil back to the launch site. Vibration levels generated by the tunnel boring machines are predicted to be below limits for building damage, including heritage structures, some of which are more susceptible to damage than the more modern structures. And this is because tunnel boring machines slowly auger through the soil and do not need to use vibratory or impact forces to break up the soil. Tunnel boring machines will be operated continuously and will travel about 10 to 15 meters a day, which means that the tunnel boring machines will pass most single-family residential lots in the matter of a day or two. Tunnel boring machines will leave soil behind, which will need to be removed from the tunnels. And one of the ways this removal can be done is by using temporary service locomotives running along temporary rail tracks with train cars that are loaded with materials produced by tunneling. And these materials are transported back to the launch site and then off-site for disposal. Temporary locomotives traveling along temporary tracks inside the tunnels have the potential to generate noise and vibration, and we looked at this in our report as part of construction impact assessment. With the use of mitigation measures, such as resilient fasteners for temporary tracks, or with the use of rubber-tired vehicles, noise and vibration levels from soil removal activities will be controlled. Before construction, our contractors will develop construction vibration management plans based on refined construction methodology. And these plans will look at potential vibration levels, identify ways to reduce them, and outline monitoring programs. These plans will be reviewed and approved by Metrolinx before construction starts. And of course, all necessary vibration mitigation measures will be put in place. During construction, we will monitor vibration levels to confirm effectiveness and inform implementation of additional measures if they're needed. Modern monitoring systems are pretty sophisticated and let us set up the equipment such a way that the contractor is alerted when vibration limits are approached. And this way we can make sure the limits are not exceeded. And of course, we will stay in touch with the local communities throughout construction. Next slide, please. Perhaps it's just my screen, but I don't see us advancing to the next slide. I'm happy to speak to it. If someone can confirm we're on the surface segment noise and vibration.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the live feed, Maria. It doesn't seem to be changing. Do you have access to the
Oh, I see it now.
presentation? It's up? Okay, great.
Yeah, there was a bit of a lag. All right, on to our third topic under noise and vibration, which is surface segment potential noise impacts. I want to start off with the train operations along the surface segment. And I want to say that revenue train operations for the surface segment are between the tunnel portal and high-tech station. Beyond high-tech station, trains slowly travel to the train storage facility, which is also assessed in our report. Between the tunnel portal and high-tech station, our study predicts a 1 to 2 decibels increase, with one of the assessed locations showing no changes. And we covered this in detail at last week's virtual open house. It's on March 2nd. Here I want to stress that the assessment was comprehensive, and this value of 1 to 2 decibels increase reflects all sound sources, which includes the heavy rail train operations along the existing CN tracks, whereas electric subway trains alone are substantially quieter than those freight trains and quieter than the overall existing sound levels without the subway. This means that subway operations do not significantly alter the sound levels along the corridor. And if we were to look at the that all-in increase of 1 to 2 decibels, provincial guidelines consider it an insignificant increase, lowest on the increases spectrum, and what is considered below noticeable, and that does not require mitigation. Vibration levels from train operations are expected to meet or be below the applicable criteria with implementation of measures like ballast mats. Picture of the ballast mat installation is shown on the right. Ballast mats are a very well-known, a very widely utilized solution to reduce vibration. They are continuous mats made of rubber, synthetic or natural, and are installed beneath the ballast bed, which is essentially crushed rock, usually, and they offer vibration isolation and protection of the ballast, as well as the track components that sit on top of the ballast. Stationary facilities. When it comes to subway stationary facilities, which include non-moving sources of noise, our assessment shows that airborne noise levels, which is noise transmitted through air, will be at or below the applicable criteria for all stationary facilities along the surface segment, which includes the traction power substation number 7, located where the train storage facility is, any ventilation equipment, and bus terminals. This can be achieved using solutions like silencers on tunnel ventilation fan systems. These are the treatments that attenuate sound because they contain sound-absorbing material that reduce the noise levels produced by fans. Moving on to train storage facility. With proven mitigation measures, the facility is expected to meet or be below the applicable noise and vibration limits. Trains will move quite slowly along the tracks within the facility, and there will not be many of them because the facility has capacity for only 15 trains. To mitigate any noise impacts, we identified a 5.5 noise barrier extending along the west side of the facility from about north of Bantry Avenue to south of 16th Avenue, and we anticipate that it will effectively attenuate noise from the facility operations. If you'd like to find out more about the assessment and look at the barrier layout, I encourage you to look at our noise and vibration report. Train storage facility will also have special track work, like track crossings, to let trains switch from one track to another. And as trains cross over the special track work, they can generate noise and vibration. To reduce noise and vibration levels as trains travel over special track work, we identified solutions like movable point frogs. This mitigation measure was discussed in more detail at last week's March 2nd virtual open house, so I encourage you to view that presentation if you're interested. Our goal at the end of the day is to make sure that there are no significant differences between what's experienced in the community today and what will be experienced when the extension is up and running. And the proposed mitigation measures that we just reviewed will get us there. With this, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague Kevin, who will walk you through the natural environment topics.
That's great. Thank you very much, Maria. Good evening, everyone. Right now, I'd just like to spend a few moments talking about vegetation removals, as Maria introduced. So right at the outset, I will say that Metrolinx and the project team are committed to protecting as many trees as possible while building the Yonge North Subway extension. Vegetation removals will be reduced to the greatest extent possible, and limited only to the construction footprint. The image that you're actually seeing to the right of your screen right now is an example of the tree protection fencing that will be used to protect trees while construction is occurring. These tree protection zones are sized to meet the tree's individual needs, and the condition of the tree fencing, like all mitigation measures, will be regularly monitored. For any trees that must be removed, we will work with municipalities and groups like the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority to provide compensation in accordance with Metrolinx's vegetation guideline. The vegetation guideline takes a landscape science-based approach to vegetation compensation that meets and exceeds the requirements of applicable local bylaws. The Metrolinx vegetation guideline also ensures that many more trees are planted than are removed as part of Metrolinx's work. Just to the final point on the slide, I will note that any vegetated areas that are temporarily disturbed as part of construction will be restored and revegetated to ensure that there is no significant disruption or aesthetic issues during the construction period. We can go to the next slide, please. I would now like to spend a few moments just talking about some of the species at risk findings that were determined through the environmental project report. Specifically, in the case of species at risk, we performed a review of existing information that was informed by information from groups such as the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and others that had identified sources of potential habitat for protected species such as barn swallows and bats. We found the potential for this habitat along the alignment, which may be impacted as a result of construction at the surface. Although we're not anticipating impacts to species at risk or their habitat due to the current construction footprint, I can say that Metrolinx will be completing additional targeted studies closer to the date of construction to verify our findings. We are not anticipating impacts to protected aquatic species such as red-side dace, and in cases where in-water work is proposed, such as the German Mills Creek work we talked about during our last public meeting, the portion of the watercourse where work will occur has been screened of species at risk potential. Construction of the YNSE will meet all regulatory requirements for environmental protection, including those under the Endangered Species Act. And the image to the right actually shows an example of the East Don River close to where work is occurring, or will be occurring, I should say. This particular portion of the East Don River is designated as an urban valley under the Provincial Greenbelt Plan and is also located within a Toronto and Region Conservation Authority regulated area. I just wanted to note that for this audience, the subway will actually be traveling below grade at this location, so we're not anticipating in-water work here. And yeah, that is essentially my high-level overview of species at risk for the time being. Of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions as the meeting goes on. But at this point in time, I'd like to hand things off to my colleague, Charlie, who's going to talk about some of the feedback that we've heard during the project so far. So with that, I think we can take it to the next slide, and I'll hand things off to Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And good evening, everyone. What we've heard about the project, and there are three main items that I'll be talking about, and I'll pass it on to property with Maria Doyle to talk to the last item. Tunneling questions, essentially dimensions of the tunnels. I'll go into more in depth in the next slide. The depth of the tunnels below Pomona Creek, infrastructure questions on emergency exit buildings, and then the property questions on timelines and property notifications. Sorry, can everyone hear me? Thanks.
Yep, we can hear you, Charlie. Yep, all good.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So tunnel dimensions and depths in Royal Orchard. So the tunnels are approximately 6 kilometers of twin tunnels. We will be extending from the existing Finch Station to the tunnel portal just north of Langstaff Road East. That's just south of the 407. And currently the tunnels will be 5.6 meters in diameter. They're twin tunnels, and they're approximately 5.6 meters apart. The tunnel will be 17 meters deep below Pomona Creek and roughly around 21 to 26 meters deep below Royal Orchard Park. You see the diagram below. You'll see how the tunnel portal comes from the portal down below Pomona Creek and Pomona Park, as well as going to potential Royal Orchard Station and underneath the East Don River culvert in that Royal Orchard area. You can go to the next slide, please. Emergency exit buildings. Emergency exit buildings are single-story structures that are smaller than a house and can be designed in a variety of ways to fit the area around them. We will consult with the community on the look and feel of these buildings. And one of the images to the right, you can see it's not an emergency exit building, but it's a way of designing a building to fit within the context of its surroundings. It's an existing station in Spadina line. Emergency exit buildings will need to be at various points along the tunnel section of the road and are only used in an unlikely event of emergency in the tunnel that would require people to safely evacuate or get out to the surface. They're spaced along the route of the tunnel and only on the underground portions. We are working to determine the exact location of the emergency exit buildings needed along the entire route, and essentially the underground portion of the subway route for this extension, with a specific focus to reduce the number needed in residential areas. And I'll pass it over to Maria. I think the next slide is the property.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Charlie. So recently, people would have been receiving notifications about the EPR addendum if their properties fell within the study area. In addition, Metrolinx Property Acquisitions has sent letters to several landowners for properties that are within the areas where the YNSC project will require property acquisitions. Those properties are properties that we have identified that will need earlier acquisition, that are scheduled to be to start the negotiations process probably mid-summer or early fall of 2022. In addition, we've actually commenced negotiations on several properties, or a handful of properties, I should say, that are required very early in the project. And those properties are actually in full negotiations at this time. But the bulk of the properties are still being defined, and several of the properties that we will be negotiating starting this summer are still having refinements of the design. So at this time, we're not able to actually fully engage with landowners on those details of those properties. Once we have the design work complete, we will start to reach out to those individual property owners through our dedicated program staff member. Where properties are identified in the future, where they will be receiving landowner letters, letters acknowledging that we are looking at an interest or a requirement in their property. And again, those people will be contacted as the process falls out. Staff will work with those landowners that are identified to try and reach a mutually beneficial agreement for any of the properties that the YNSC project needs. And I'm going to pass it off to, I believe it's
me, Maria Leona.
Leona, thank you. I was just looking at the smile. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we've landed here on the project timeline, and we usually talk about this at the beginning of our presentation, but today we're going to end on it because we want to talk about where we're going next. You can see that we're at a pretty significant, on the eve of some pretty significant milestones that will move us from the planning phase into the procurement and construction phase. So we're talking today about the environmental project report addendum, and you've heard where we are in that process. Up shortly will be the release of our advanced tunnel request for qualifications, the first step on a journey to get us to tunnel construction late in summer 2023. We're also completing the geotechnical investigations. That is some critical information that we need for design and construction for the project, and we'll be finishing that up in the next couple of months. What's important here for me is this blue line at the bottom, this ongoing public engagement that has begun way back at the release of the IBC, has continued and will continue all the way through this project. You're going to hear a lot us say we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here with the community, having these ongoing conversations, sharing information, listening to the community all the way through to opening day. Next slide, please. So we're just looking at some of the upcoming engagement opportunities. The public review period for the EPR addendum closes March 14th, as James was referencing right at the beginning. We're going to have a series of virtual open houses on each of our milestones. Finch Early Works is one of the ones that you'll hear about very soon. But until then, we'll be having pop-ups at community centers, libraries, transit hubs. You may have already seen us around the community dropping flyers, postcards, promoting these events, promoting where we are and how you can get in touch with us. You've heard a lot about our upcoming community office. That'll be near the northern end of the extension. We'll be staffed by the community engagement team, which you'll be very familiar with by the time we're there in the office itself. And that's where we'll be all the time to answer your questions and be available to you. We're also going to be exploring some upcoming noise and vibration mitigation experiential opportunities, and those will be available at the community office. So more to come on that as well. And next slide, please. Of course, this is where you can reach us now. all the time. Please send us emails, call us, visit the website, see if your questions there. Perhaps what you're wondering about has already been answered through some of these virtual open houses, but we're available to you. And this is a very important part of the project for us. So there are multiple opportunities to make your voice heard, and we want to hear from you. You can reach us anytime. And I think that's it. I'll hand it back to you, James.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Leona, and thank you to you and to the rest of the presenters. Gosh, there's a lot of content there to cover, and I hope that everyone is ready for shift gears and get into the question and answer portion of the evening. So I understand from Ali that we've got a few people waiting in our Zoom room, but we had a few questions submitted in advance on our Metrolinx Engage forum. So I think that's where we're going to start to pick our questions. And I'm just scrolling through and I see that the top question here is about noise and vibration. So we'll take a couple of questions from Engage, and then we will move down to Ali in the Zoom room to find out what's on everybody's mind. So the first question here is, how many residential homes will be affected by these minor sounds and vibrations from the subway? And how many times per day will they experience this? So I think we can perhaps break this response down into a couple of key topics. So maybe Stephen, you could speak to the first bit about how many residential homes are going to be affected by through the tunnel portion of the route by noise and vibration from the subway. Is there anything we can say about that at this point? And you're on mute, Stephen, so I'll just get you to take your mic off mute. And a reminder, too, for everybody in the Zoom room, don't be like me or Stephen when Ali calls on you. Just remember to make a quick check on your microphone to make sure that you don't have us muted or don't have yourself muted. Otherwise, we won't be able to hear you. But Stephen, thank you very much for demonstrating what not to do. And I will let you go ahead and answer the question.
Okay, great. Assume everyone can hear me okay now. A good question on how many residential homes will be affected. And what I'll say is there are residential properties from Finch all the way up to north of Highway 7 within the study area. And all of these homes within the study area need to be assessed and need to be mitigated for noise and vibration. Thinking more about what the question may be specifically asking, and that is getting into the details around the Royal Orchard community that we've been talking about quite extensively over the last sort of 8 to 10 months. We are traveling below 20 single-family residential home building structures, and we are traveling under 15 front or backyards. And so those are the properties that have had sort of the most attention and the most focus on them for our noise and vibration mitigation. We are also traveling directly below the condominium building at 8111 Yonge Street, and these are all residential homes. They're in a high-rise format as opposed to a ground-related single-family home style, but we are traveling under the 8111 Yonge Street condominium building, which is an 18-floor condo with many units on each floor.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Stephen. And I thought we could deal with the second portion of this question and get our acoustic specialist, Sam Calendron, to give us a hand with this, because the other part of it is, Sam, how many times will they experience this noise or vibration? And could you give us a sense of how noticeable those sounds and vibrations are actually going to be?
Yeah, thanks, James. And just to recap, as Stephen said, this project runs from Finch Station in the south all the way to the train storage facility in the north. And we completed vibration assessments for the entire alignment. The focus was on what we call sensitive receptors, such as residences, which could include, single-family homes or apartment buildings and condominiums that could be most affected by noise and vibration from the project. Vibration mitigation, such as floating slab track and other methods, have been recommended based on these predicted impacts at these most critical receptors and residences. All other receptors that are located, farther away or located on upper floors of a condo building would be, would experience even lower noise and vibration levels. Specific to the Royal Orchard area, where the tunnels are running under single-family homes, Metrolinx is committing to implement mitigation measures to limit the sound levels to less than 30 dBA, or similar to a whisper, and to limit the vibration levels to less than 0.1 millimeters per second, such that they are imperceptible to the human touch.
So, needless to say, Sam, the noise and vibration from the running of the subway trains is, it's going to be very difficult to notice. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
So I want to move on to the next question here on Engage, and this one deals with traffic. It says that there is a lot of vehicle traffic on Baythorn Drive. This would be in the Royal Orchard community in Markham, with people going to and from work in the mornings and late afternoon, including cars and school buses dropping off and picking up their children at Baythorn Public School. So what measures are being taken with regard to surface traffic, especially when the tunnel digging is being done, so that access and egress from the school and residents along Baythorn Drive and others is not adversely impacted by construction vehicles and equipment? And there's also another part of this question here that says, please also comment on the impact on traffic flow north and south on portions of Yonge Street that will be impacted when digging is being done. So maybe what we'll do is, we'll take the same approach. We'll break that question down into a couple of parts. So maybe, Leona, when it comes to our approach to managing traffic, what can we say at this point, and what can the people in Royal Orchard and along Baythorn Drive expect when construction is on?
Sure. Thanks, James. So what we can say at this point is what we do across all of our projects where traffic impacts are expected through construction, where we will have some sort of presence in any area. We're committed to communicating early and often with communities. So we'll make sure everybody gets plenty of notice about what's planned. We'll use all available communications channels. We'll use clear and highly visible signage to make driving, cycling, walking around construction areas as easy and as safe as possible. You mentioned the public school in there. So in a circumstance like this, we would work really closely with the school. We'd want to understand the traffic patterns of their students and their families around the school and work with them to make it as easy as possible for everybody. And then just be available, of course, for discussion and questions and making sure that everyone sort of has a voice in how we're planning this work to make getting around the community as easy as possible.
And there's a part of this too, and maybe this can partially address some of those concerns that were expressed about traffic on Yonge Street. This question really kind of gets to the idea of, well, what's going to happen during construction of the tunnels? And Stephen, maybe you could, shine some light on what the expectation would be there in terms of what that would look like at the surface level while we are tunneling.
Yeah, thanks, James. And there's a few things that I'm going to talk about here as far as traffic management goes. And Leona hit on a few of them. And it's not just about the auto vehicles, but it's also about what we've typically referred to as the vulnerable road users, those cyclists, the pedestrians, especially in sort of along Baythorn and the Royal Orchard community, those children walking to and from school. So our what we refer to as our traffic, all forms of traffic management and traffic operations is something that's taken very seriously and something that is planned very deliberately. And it's not only planned by Metrolinx and our various advisors and contractors, but there's also a responsibility that we have to seek permits and approvals from the actual road authorities. And in the case of the Royal Orchard community, that would be the City of Markham. Yonge Street, that would be the region of York. And we're also dealing with Richmond Hill, Vaughan, and the City of Toronto as road authorities. And so it isn't just Metrolinx and our contractors deciding what to do, but it's us going to the road authorities to seek their permission to occupy the roadways to do the construction that we need to do, and working with them to make sure that their interests, and that is to provide service to the residents and businesses along the roads, are protected during the construction phase. I won't say that it won't be without its disruptions. construction of this nature will be disruptive, but really what we need to do is make sure that we're working in a way that minimizes the disruptions, and as Leona mentioned, clearly communicating so that all of the necessary planning can be put into place to keep everybody safe and to keep access available at all times. For the work on Yonge Street, the tunneling operation will be quite unnoticeable from the surface, which means the operation of Yonge Street as it exists today will continue on for the majority of the tunneling operation. There will be some short duration moments where we do need to occupy lanes on Yonge Street, and that is typically where we do work which is called building head walls. And what that means is at each of the station locations, we need to install concrete, essentially walls down into the ground that will be the ends of what is the future station box. That is the impactful work that will happen during the construction of the tunnel that will affect traffic operations. It's relatively short duration, meaning a couple of months. And once it's finished, the work interrupting traffic on Yonge Street, and again, all forms of traffic, including those pedestrians and cyclists, will be quite minimal. The advantage that we have on the project as we're sort of executing it, working from a launch shaft in the Langstaff Gateway area, means that all of that sort of industrial type of activity, the removal of the tunneling excavation that's coming out as the sort of concrete tunnel liners are going in, and the delivery and removal of all of that material from site, all of that operation is focused in the Langstaff Gateway area, which is an optimal location because it's located quite close to both Highways 407 and Highway 7. So we don't actually have to circulate along Yonge Street for very long. We can get onto the provincial highway network and remove and bring those materials to the site. And I guess the last thing I'll say on traffic is sort of we are working already quite closely with all of the municipalities through what we refer to as a traffic and transportation working group. Rest assured that the municipalities are bringing to our attention the very real reality of the levels of congestion that exist on the roads within our study area, and the need to sort of really sort of protect for a minimum number of lanes in all directions through the construction phase. So even if we need to occupy some of those existing lanes on the roadway, we will be looking at building temporary lanes to maintain the levels of service that are needed to move traffic through the area.
Yeah, I mean, traffic is a big deal, right? I think anybody who lives in this region, they know they spend enough time in congestion, or it can be difficult enough to get around. So that's why we're doing the work that we're doing, is to help people move around. So it sounds too like what you're saying is that it's really a team effort. We're not doing the traffic planning within a bubble. We're relying on local experts to help inform our plans and work with them to make sure that, like, no matter how you get around, whether it's in a car or on transit, bike, or you walk, we'll work to kind of make our footprint as small as possible and make sure that we can keep traffic flowing, which is going to be really important. So what I would like to do now is I understand that Ali has a few people in our interactive lounge, the Zoom room, who would like to ask questions. So Ali, I'm going to throw it down to you. Who do you have there?
Thank you very much, James. We've got one hand up right now, and maybe we'll have a few more to come shortly. So Sharif, I'm going to go to you first and just unmute you here so that you can ask your question. Oh.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Sharif. I'm just a young professional in North York area, and I was just looking into this stuff as a transit, working in transit industry as well. I've been noticing that transit costs across North America have ballooned, and part of the reason is we tend to do excessive tunneling and grand station designs. And I'm looking at this project where we're building a station. I think one of the stations you guys showed is 50 meters underneath, and the tunneling itself is beyond 50 meters. Is that really necessary to mitigate vibrations, or is that more so to mitigate any complaints that might be coming up? I know it's a touchy subject, but I hope you guys can see, like, this is ballooning costs and transit price. And I just want to get your opinion because you guys are the professionals working on it.
Yeah, it's a timely question, and I saw Stephen, you shift in your chair. You're getting your microphone ready, so I think you want to jump on this one. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, and it's a really insightful question. So there are a number of factors that are driving the costs of transit construction, not just in the GTA but across North America, and a lot of these are related to the demand for infrastructure construction worldwide. Essentially around the world, we're in an infrastructure boom right now. So we are in competition with every other jurisdiction around the world that is building major transit infrastructure projects. And so the competition for essentially the expertise and the labor to build these types of projects has really gone up quite dramatically. The other sort of element that has been driven up in cost over, I'll say, the last sort of half decade are the raw material costs. Concrete, steel are two main ones. The raw material costs for the infrastructure that we're building have really gone up. And so when we think about the cost pressures on the project, it's the elements of the design can affect cost, but actually the inputs into the project cost are actually driving those significant increases. When we think about the tunnel method of construction, really it is sort of around the world considered to be the most efficient method of building below ground subways. There has been a lot of discussion about why couldn't cut and cover be used. The reality is that cut and cover may be sort of okay for very shallow sections of subway in areas that aren't impactful to existing services and existing operations. But if you think about how disruptive doing a cut and cover type of operation along Yonge Street would be, meaning a full closure of Yonge Street for years and years and years to do that work, when you think about what the societal impact of that type of construction methodology would be and the real costs that impact has, the tunnel methodology using tunnel boring machines and putting it in the ground where we don't disturb the surface, which I mentioned earlier in the traffic question, it really is the most efficient way of building the project. And when you ask the question about sort of station design, as part of the subway program across Metrolinx, we are looking at what is the core function of these stations, and really that is to provide access into the subway network. And how do we design these to be excellent customer experience spaces in an efficient way that is not sort of creating grand architectural single discrete buildings. We're hopeful that many of our transit infrastructure elements can be embedded and sort of hide behind development and redevelopment of the corridor, and that they will blend in with the future urban fabric. And the last thing I'll say on sort of the discussion around costs is the depth of the subway tunnels as it goes north on Yonge Street. The key factor in mitigating the effects of noise and vibration is the removing the noise and vibration from the source, and that is right in the tunnel. And so the depth is a factor, but the most important factor is that double pie floating slab technology that we're proposing. The depth of the tunnels as we go up Yonge Street, we are traveling below the East Don River crossing, which is just in between the two golf courses. What we want to do is we want to be deep enough below that river crossing so that we do not affect the existing culvert that carries the Don River across Yonge Street. And that culvert has some steel piles that sort of it is sitting on. We have set the elevation of the tunnels to be below those piles. What that means is we're sort of at the minimal elevation below the East Don River crossing, but because the grades climb so steeply along the road, and our subway tunnel is only going up at a relatively flat grade compared to the ground surface, the depth gets sort of significantly deep as we sort of travel north up to Royal Orchard. But the good thing is once the tunnel boring machine is in the ground, it doesn't really matter how deep you are because the per meter cost of tunneling is the same, whether you're 6 meters below the surface or you're 50 meters below the surface. And so the cost profile is not really driven higher by the depth of the tunnel. Hope that helps answer the question.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Sharif, I see that you've got a follow-up here. We don't have anyone else yet with a question, so I'm going to unmute you here.
Okay, yeah, that was very informative. Thank you. I had one other question about that. So any stations that fall in that area with deeper tunnels, will they involve sort of high-speed elevators for passengers to go from surface level to the station level, or are they still going to be descending via stairs? Is that sort of thought out yet?
Okay, maybe what we'll do is, Charlie, would you be able to contribute on this one? Because this one's more about like station design.
Correct, yes. I can help on that. So for every station, we need to provide escalators, stairs, and elevators. And in general, we would want to make sure that passengers, through the passenger experience on stations, are able to traverse the depth regardless of how deep it is, and able to get out of the station as well. So yes, that's one aspect we're looking at in high-speed elevators, as well as the quantity of elevators to make sure that we can get the sufficient passenger in and out of the station. So that's something we're doing the study on, and making sure that we have travel time obviously requirements for getting in and out of the station. So that's one of the aspects of the passenger experience in these stations.
Oh, that's great, and really, really interesting questions. Thanks for contributing. I appreciate it. So I think, Ali, when you have someone in the Zoom room who has raised their hand and is ready to ask a question, I will depend on you to get into my ear, and I will direct the show back down to you. But I think for now, we're going to go back to Metrolinx Engage, because I see that we've had a couple more questions uploaded since we started our presentation. So I'm going to go and find the top voted one. And this one, it's also about noise and vibration. And maybe we'll start the response here with our acoustic specialist, Sam Kalendran. So the question is, how can you guarantee the success of mitigation measures based only on predictions and modeling? Real world experience with floating slabs. So this is a floating slab track, one of the solutions that we plan to use to make sure that the subway is quiet through the tunnels. Real world experience with that technology suggests they are not as successful as you maintain. Comparisons between York University and homes in the Royal Orchard community are not apples to apples comparisons. So how would you respond to that, Sam? Maybe breaking off the first bit of that question, how can you guarantee their success based only on the studies and models that we produce?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks a lot, James, and great question. I always love talking about vibration mitigation. So we're very confident in the performance of floating slab technology. It's been used extensively throughout the world to good effect in many complicated and complex situations. Specifically, the double tie floating slab itself has been used internationally as a case study of how effective vibration mitigation is using such technology. Since it was first used, and this is now many decades ago, there have been iterative improvements in the technology that kind of improve the performance, and it's continued to be used throughout the world to very good effect. Our contract documents, and we've been very clear with this as well in the VOHs, is that we're committing to a maximum sound level or sound levels of less than 30 dBA, and that's going to be kind of written into our contract documents and specifications as well. So to answer that question, yeah, we're fairly confident in this technology. It's been proven to be effective time and time again, and we see no reason to believe otherwise here.
And there's also, Sam, the other part of the I guess it's more of a comment, but I think it's worth addressing. So it says here, the comparisons between York University, and when they talk about York University, they're referring to the practical example that we've written about on our blog, where there is a stretch on the western leg of line 1 that runs under a lecture hall at York University under the business school. And, we've taken people there to show them just how difficult it is to either hear or feel the subway because it uses that new technology. It's really the only part of, as you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the only part of Toronto's subway line right now that uses that technology. And so they're saying that comparisons between the technology that's used in the tunnels below York University and the single-family homes in Royal Orchard, that it's not an accurate comparison. So, I mean, is that true?
Yeah. So thanks, James, and I'll correct you there if you don't mind. It wasn't the only place that was where floating slab track was used. It was actually used in the 1978 Spadina subway extension, which was built, more than 40 years ago, through residential areas and things like that. It was also used on the Shepherd subway extension as well. And then most recently, it was used on the Toronto Spadina subway extension. So yeah, it's been used extensively in Toronto and the GTA through a variety of soil conditions, and the results have been excellent. In terms of, is it an apples to apples condition? There are definitely differences. The York University situation was quite complex with the tunnels and the station built very close to the foundation of the building that's the Schulich School of Business building. So yeah, they're definitely different situations between the two, but the end result, and this is I think the most important thing, kind of getting to those imperceptible vibration levels and the very quiet sound levels where people had a very hard time hearing, is I think the key message there, and what we wanted people to try to experience as well. So I think that was the key message. It's, this is less than 30 dBA. You cannot, or you could barely hear it, right? So that was the kind of message and the reason for that comparison. I will note that it's not part of our assessment process. We didn't really include it in the impact assessment report. This is just more to help with, public consultations and giving people an idea of what to expect and what not to feel.
And I know too, it's come up, like a single family home is, going to be quite a bit different in construction than, University Hall, which is largely concrete. I mean, would the materials, would the surfaces in both of those make a difference? Would it be comparable one way or another?
Yeah, so generally speaking, homes are lighter weight construction than lecture halls. There's also different acoustic characteristics in terms of institutional buildings, which tend to have a lot of hard surfaces versus residential rooms that tend to have, couches and drywall and things like that. So there are kind of differences in acoustics between, an institutional building and a residential building. I will say one more thing is like the interaction between a subway tunnel and a structure, like the vibration from subway tunnels and structures are well understood for a variety of building types. And the type of vibration or how vibration emanates from a tunnel structure is also well understood. So, the interaction between vibration waves and low-rise family homes is something that's kind of well known at this point.
All right. And Sam, never, and this goes for the rest of our panelists, never hesitate to correct me. I am on a learning journey through this, probably just as much as anybody. So by all means, if I get it a little bit wrong or a lot wrong, be sure to call it out because I don't want to leave anybody with the wrong impression. I'm going to move on to another question here that we've got on Metrolinx Engage. And this one is about... it says disruptions at street level, so perhaps traffic. So it says if tunneling under Yonge means minimal disruptions at street level, then why not just stay under Yonge Street entirely? So keep the route of the subway under Yonge Street rather than curving to the east to meet the existing railway corridor. Why don't we just stick with that plan? So maybe Stephen, I will have you start with this one, and if there's any other panelists that you wanted to throw it to, I will leave that up to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, James. And we've sort of talked about this quite extensively in sort of the alignments that we looked at for the project. And really what Metrolinx is charged with is delivering the best project for the long term. And the long term is sort of meeting the needs of the existing communities from a transit standpoint, but also the future communities that are going to be there along the line. And the project that we are moving forward with is really anchored around our bridge station as being sort of that central transit hub. It is the convergence point of 5 rapid transit services and really will enable a launch pad or a gateway to all of York Region from the Yonge North Subway extension. And we can't achieve that station location by keeping the subway on Yonge. So we have decided that the subway needs to shift off of Yonge Street to achieve our bridge station location. And we looked at all sorts of alignments to get there. And the final alignment, the one that we're proceeding with, provides the best project for the investment that is being made.
All right, great. Thank you. Now I hear from our correspondent in the Zoom room that we've had a few questions raised. So Ali, I'm going to send it back down to you. Who do we have there and what's their question?
Thanks very much, James. We have 2 hands up right now from Renata and Roz in that order. So Renata, I'm going to start with you and unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Hi, everyone. So I have this question goes to Sam. So you just said that subway tunneling under residences is well documented and well known. Yet when we've asked for the past year for examples of where this has been done elsewhere, no other examples could be given, certainly not in Toronto, which is why Schulich School of Business was given as the example and why, you know, people were taken there to listen to the noise and vibration. But throughout the world as well, there were no other examples that could be given to us other than Barbican in London, which is, from the reports that I've read, is not ideal. So Schulich School of Business is a university residence. It's a building. It's not a residence, sorry. And it does not compare at all to our homes that are 50 years old. And so there's that's it. And the Schulich School of Business is not going to be sold anytime soon, that they've got to worry about the devaluation of their properties because of this. So that's for Sam.
Yeah. Okay, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for that. I think what I said was the interaction of vibration waves and single family homes is well understood, as well as how vibration waves emanate from tunnel structures. So these interactions are kind of well understood. And so that's what I was kind of saying. My worldwide experience is a little limited, so I can't say that this has never been done internationally. But that's what I was trying to say is, you know, the vibration from a tunnel is generated in a certain way, and the vibration waves interact with homes in a certain way. And this has been well documented, you know, throughout the world, and it forms part of the prediction procedures and modeling methods that have been developed.
Yeah, Sam, maybe I'll just sort of add on to that, and thanks for your question, Renata. There are sort of a number of locations internationally that we've provided sort of through previous presentations, and there are a number in sort of the London area, not only the Barbican, but also sort of residential communities along the high-speed 1 project that was undertaken essentially to connect London to the Channel Tunnel. And I just do want to call out the reference to the Barbican that you made. We have used that as an example, and there are 2 really distinct locations within the Barbican that's actually an excellent example of the effectiveness of the single slab floating track technology. There have been a number of media reports about noise and vibration complaints in the Barbican area. And we consulted quite extensively with Transport for London and their chief engineer, who is responsible for the existing subway system in the London area, including the sections below the Barbican. And what we have learned from them is that there are some legacy sections of subway below the Barbican that are effectively subway tracks placed on gravel ballast within the subway tunnels. no mitigation, and those are the areas that are actually generating the noise and vibration concerns for the community. The sections of track that travel actually below the Barbican Concert Theatre and sort of the auditorium are constructed about 40 years ago and sit on top of single track floating slab, the technology that we're planning on using. And the data that Transport for London has that they've shared with us is that they continue to perform exceptionally well, including no complaints coming from sort of that auditorium and that facility, which again is different from some of the other areas in that Barbican community.
Thanks very much, Stephen. We have a few hands up now with some more questions. So we've got Roz, then Colleen, then Yakov, and then Ed. So we're going to go in that order. So Roz, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, this is a question for Stephen as well. I just wanted clarification. The TTC 60-meter zone of influence, is that included in the Yonge North subway extension alignment, the transit corridor?
Yeah, so thanks for your question, Roz. What you're referring to is what we refer to as the transit corridor lands. This is a boundary that exists, like a boundary to be established. It hasn't been established yet for the Yonge subway extension. It does exist for the other three subways, so the Shepherd or the Scarborough, the Eglinton Crosstown, and the Ontario line, but it doesn't exist yet for the Yonge North. And what it is along the alignment of the subway and 30 meters on either side of the subway, there will become a designation on those properties, which is referred to as the transit corridor lands. It doesn't mean that we're going to be doing anything on those properties, but what it is it's a designation that requires owners of those properties that if they want to sort of do major renovations or do something on their property, they need to notify Metrolinx, and there needs to be sort of an assessment by Metrolinx to see if there will be any effect on the subway infrastructure from what those owners want to do. And so that's the purpose of the transit corridor lens designation. It is merely just to make sure that over the fullness of time and over the next 100 years, that as things are happening on the properties in close proximity, so that 30 meters either side of the subway alignment, there is a requirement for the owners to come in, inform Metrolinx that something is going to be taking place, and there to be a screening to see if it will have any impact on the subway. So that's the transit corridor lands designation. Our team is working through the process of putting in place all of the necessary, essentially drawings and details to take and complete that designation, which should take place sometime later in 2022.
Great, thanks very much for that, Stephen. So next up, so the order is Colleen and then Yakov and then Ed moving forward. So Colleen, I'm going to come to you now to unmute you.
Okay, thanks. I guess just to follow up on that, though, I find it interesting that in the future, residents who have lived longer here and who have owned property here far longer than Metrolinx would have to be asking Metrolinx in the future for permission, in fact, to make sure that whatever we're doing to our properties doesn't affect the subway, that we don't want to be here in the first place. So I just find that kind of ironic that we would have to go through a process of screening and, I guess, to some degree, permission seeking when that hasn't been done in the same kind of way for the residents who actually are on the property right now, and to sort of look at its screening and, you know, impacts in the same kind of way. So I just wanted to put that out there as ironic. I guess the other question that I had, it goes to the person who spoke about, you know, the reason why it's going off into Bridgeway Station is because of the future development. I guess what my question would be is that if there's future development planned for that area and the subway is then extended further north, would then it veer back at some point to Yonge Street, or would it then be tunneling under all those other homes that are now located north of High Tech and continue basically into more residential areas? Because if in fact, at some point, it's going to veer back to Yonge Street, then it would seem kind of odd to kind of just veer off to the right for a while and veer back to the west direction at some point, given that now you'll be tunneling even under more houses if you continue going north straight off of Bridgeway. So I'm just wondering if there's been any consideration given to that, as well as notification to those residents in those areas that perhaps in the future, if there is a continued extension of the subway, that it would actually impact their homes as well.
Thanks very much, Colleen. Stephen, do you want to start off with that one?
Yeah, I sure do. Thanks, Ellie, and thanks for the question, Roz. So I just want to sort of reflect back on your first comment about the transit corridor land designation. Totally get your point. The one thing that we do need to keep in mind, though, is sort of these are sort of activities that homeowners would sort of be looking at doing that would trigger a need to go into the municipality and seek sort of the necessary permissions and approvals. And so, you know, we're not really overlaying in anything that's incremental to sort of the activities and due diligence that already need to be done. And really, again, it's sort of not for, you know, having some sort of assertion of control. All Metrolinx wants to do is make sure that the things that are going to be happening over the next, you know, long period of time, and we're not talking about over the next 10 or 20 years, we're talking about over the next 80 to 100 years, that we have an awareness of what's happening, and we can just have a screening to make sure that the transit infrastructure and the services that it provides are protected. So regarding the sort of further northerly extension, what we are doing is we're setting up the project to enable a efficient extension of the subway service along the CN corridor. And the reason why we sort of are looking at that as the sort of the opportunity is because in the recent years, your governments have invested a lot of money in building the rapid transit services on Yonge Street already. That BRT service is in place, and it is a significant investment, but it's also a significant transit service that can move a lot of people. And so if we think about the effectiveness of moving the Yonge subway back to Yonge Street and basically providing a parallel level of rapid transit service, it isn't an efficient solution. It's actually sort of a pretty much sort of a silly thing to do. And so what we have done is we've set up the Yonge subway extension to extend along the CN rail corridor, which would provide parallel rapid transit services connecting in as far north and, you know, again, these are sort of the future projects. It's not part of the Yonge North planning, but it's what we're protecting for. Connecting into what will ultimately be east-west rapid transit services in York Region running along Major Mackenzie Drive. And what we always try to do is create points of connectivity and the network effect. So the more points of connectivity we can create, the better the opportunity is for people to make travel choices by transit. And so if you think about extending the Yonge North subway extension along the CN corridor, it really places that subway service at the sort of Major Mackenzie GO station along the rail corridor, about a kilometer west of Yonge Street, which means that we've got great spacing for rapid transit services in a sort of an area that will be intensifying through the sort of various growth plans that are in place, and not duplicating rapid transit services, which is already well served on Yonge Street by the bus rapid transit project.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks, Colleen, for your question. We still have a few hands up. So next up, we've got Yakov and then Ed, and then we have another question from Renata, and then followed by Joan. So Yakov, I'm going to go to you now to ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Yakov Zarkin. I'm the New Blue Party of Ontario candidate for the riding of Thornhill for the upcoming provincial election. In December, an open letter was sent to the residents of the Royal Orchard community in which the sound made by a passing train through the tunnel extension was likened to, quote, an average whisper. The concern I've heard from a number of constituents is that regardless of the actual intensity of the noise, if it is occurring continuously, it becomes rather unpleasant. I would like to request clarification on one point, which is how many times per day will trains run below these residential homes and emit this average whisper sound?
Thanks very much, Yakov.
Yeah, so maybe Stephen, we'll start with you, and I'll leave it to you. Maybe you could hand it off to someone if you need any more insight on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and thank you for the question, Yakov. So the service plan, and what we refer to as the service plan, is the frequency of trains and the number of trains that are going to be running. The service plan for the Yonge North extension is really going to transition from what we refer to as opening day service to mature state service. So on opening day, the demand for the subway service is not going to be what it is in the mature state, which is essentially full build out. And what the opening day service will look like is trains running about every 210 seconds. And 210 seconds is approximately 3.5 minutes. So the trains during the peak period will be running at about 3.5 minute intervals. As service demands increase, so as ridership demands increase, in order to accommodate those ridership demands, what we need to do is we need to put more trains on the network. So basically reduce the spacing between each train. And the TTC has a plan in place, which they refer to as their Line 1 Capacity Enhancement Program, to transition from that 210 second frequency service down to what will ultimately be 100 second headway service. And so that would be trains running every minute and 40 seconds. And so when we talk about sort of the opening day service, it's about 3.5 minutes a train. And in the mature state, and when I say mature state, we're talking about 20 to 30 years out, we're looking at about 100 second headways or 1 minute and 40 seconds.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So the order moving forward is Ed, and then Dwight, and then Joan, or sorry, Dwight is Renata, and then Joan, and then Roz has another question as well. So we're gonna go to Ed now. So Ed, I'm gonna unmute you so you can ask your question.
Great, thank you. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I hear you see the smile, great.
Yep.
So I live in 28 Thorny Bray. I have, my home is going to be one of the fortunate homes that's going to be hosting the tunnel underneath. My specific question is that I've heard in the last 3 meetings over the last week, discussion about the dB noise and vibration level that's been discussed. It has been, numbers been discussed about, around 20, 25 dBs. And then I think you guys basically came, no, it's not really 20, 25 dB. It's going to be, we assure with full confidence and blah, blah, blah. It's going to be 30 dBs or below 30 dBs. Is that correct? That's correct, right? I got it. Pretty much my understanding. That's the goal that you guys are basically saying, that we're going to aim to be sure that you should not hear anything below 30 dBs. My question then is, if that's the case with all assurance for an accountability, why is the EA addendum not changed to reflect your confidence that it will be 30 dBs and below, that remains at 35 dB? It seems to me that it seems that we're saying one thing, but we're not willing to put our money where our mouth is and state it in writing overall to assure the homeowners that that's the goal we're aiming for. Does that make sense? We're saying one thing, but we're not willing to commit in writing into another thing. That's my question. Can you address that in terms of reflect what you said and what you put in the EA addendum, please?
Yeah, and definitely. Thanks for your question. So probably a couple of things here to clarify. So maybe Maria, I'll start it with you because there might be a couple of points there in the presentation today that we could touch on, and then we could maybe head over to Sam. So I'll hand it over to you, Maria, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, thanks, James. Thank you for the question. And to clarify, in regards to the 20 to 25 dB levels, we've been consistently committing to levels under 30 dB. So this is what, as I mentioned, will be written into our environmental project report addendum, and we'll be publishing the updated addendum in about a month, so on April 16th or earlier. And that document will have an explicit commitment to Metrolinx implementing mitigation measures where we're tunneling under single-family residential homes to keep ground bore noise levels to below 30 dB, which also means that vibration will be imperceptible. So you will see that in the updated addendum very crystal clear, and this will also make its way into our contract documents.
Okay, great. And then Sam, maybe we'll pass it over to you for maybe a little bit more insight there, because there were some questions from this homeowner who said his home was going to be directly above the tunnel.
Yep. And so thanks a lot, Ed. And that's kind of one of those things we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of we looked at some of the most critical receptors. Of course, your home is one of them if it's directly above the tunnel, and our commitment is to mitigate the noise levels to less than 30 dBA, and to ensure the vibration levels are not perceptible or not feelable. In terms of just why the 35 dBA exists, I think this has also been covered in previous VOHs. It's the international standard for residential buildings in terms of ground bore noise. So it's the limit that's used around the world for transit projects. But Metrolinx is committing to 30 dBA in this case in this area. So just to clarify that, and we'll make that clear as we noted in the updated addendum, and we really appreciate this kind of feedback. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Sam. I just want to check in really quickly. So we're about 4 minutes after 8 o'clock, and we've got scheduled tonight down to 8:30. So I understand, Ali, that you've got a few more people with their hands raised in the Zoom room, and I don't see any more questions on my screen that have been entered on Metrolinx Engage. So maybe I'll just send it back to you, and we can move on to the next person with their hand up. Ali.
Thanks very much, James. We do have 3 more hands up in the Zoom room. So we've got Renata, then Joan, and then Roz with another question. So we'll go in that order. So Renata, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you. So this is a question back to Steve and for the Barbican. Could you provide us with those detailed reports about how it's not causing issues there? Because the reports that we have found and researched online show that there are quite a number of issues that are happening all around that area. It's wearing out. The repairs are not being done, and even the repairs that are being done is not mitigating the new sound that's happening just because of the technology that was used to build them in the first place. So if you could provide those detailed reports that you have, that would be helpful.
Yep, happy to, Renata.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So next up we have Joan. Joan, I'm going to unmute you now so that you can ask your question.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify one thing for those who may be listening to the recording at some point in the future. Everyone that's on the Zoom probably is very aware. But Stephen had mentioned the route, and rightly so, that it's 20 homes and 15 buildings, one of which includes a gazebo. But I think it's also important to say that the alignment will tunnel directly under one elementary school, St. Anthony Catholic, and close to, but not under, a second elementary school, Baythorn Public. Now, for my question, I don't understand why we keep referring to a 30 dBA for the whisper level. I thought that based on what I saw in figure B2-1 in the addendum, it's actually 25 dBA. I can go online, and I actually found Yale University. They have a chart which indicates noise decibel levels, and they indicate an average whisper is 25 decibels. Actually, in the Spadina subway assessment for noise and vibration study, they actually have 10 for a whisper. So that's concerning from one perspective. When I look at the tables, for example, that, as we know, are based on the 35 dBA, the amount of reduction is needed to get to that 35. I think Maria had shown, and she probably still has the slide, the receptor R40 required 20 decibel reduction to get to 35. So if we brought that down to 25, the technology would have to reduce it by 30 decibels. And if I'm reading correctly in the addendum, it says floating slab gives you at least 15 and can have, quote, more than 25. Well, clearly, if you are going to reduce it to this 25 decibel level, you're getting very tight for the technology to do that, just based on what I have read, unless you have something that indicates that post-construction, you're getting 30 decibel reduction for the floating slab technology. So that's a concern. And again, as I said, I simply don't understand why we keep talking about 35 decibels when it should be, according to your own diagram, according to what I've seen on a Yale University site, even the Spadina subway assessment, it's definitely lower than 35, definitely lower than 30, which I believe Sam had mentioned. So why are we going with this higher level?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And we'll get the signal cleared up on that for you. Sam, I saw you nodding your head there, so maybe we'll start with you. What can you tell us?
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Joan, and thanks for this question. I think we've been fairly consistent in our messaging in terms of the sound levels being less than 30 dBA, and we've said that for quite a while. And the equivalent or the similarity that we provide for reference is that it's similar to a whisper. Naturally, as you said, there's a range of whispers, and the most common reference or the most common metric for a whisper is approximately 30 dBA. That there is no exact line reaching across that kind of noise thermometer that you're talking about that says 25 decibels is exactly equal to a whisper. It is definitely a range, and that's kind of what we've tried to communicate as well. So I think we've been consistent in that, saying that less than 30 dBA is similar to a whisper, and I think our chart or noise thermometer, as you call it, is consistent with that message. That commitment, that kind of, and I think I mentioned this a short while ago, the 35 dBA is an international standard for residential buildings for rapid transit or ground-borne noise from rapid transit. But we are committing to going above and beyond that standard in this case to less than 30 dBA. So we weren't trying to kind of imply anything. It was just that's the standard, and we're going to make this much more clear in the updated addendum.
Thanks very much, Sam. We're going to move on to our next question now. So we've got another question from Roz, and I think Renata might have a follow-up question after that, or it might be a hand from before. So I'm just going to check on that as well. But Roz, oh, there, it's gone. So I think it was from before. So Roz, I'm going to go to you now and unmute you so you can ask your question.
Could you keep me unmuted so that I don't have to, I can just finish up the discussion instead of waiting for another question? I just wanted to get Stephen back when he was talking about the 30-meter buffer zone. We've had this discussion quite a few times, and I understand the 30-meter buffer zone and the permits required and everything else. But what I'm asking about is the TTC zone of influence, because when I look at the Scarborough line and the other lines, there's actually the 30-meter buffer zone, which we knew about, plus the 30-meter TTC zone of influence. So it's 60 meters. Minimum on either side, not including any bump outs or whatever else you're going to have in your planning for the transit corridor control lands. Is there any reason why the Yonge North extension would not have the TTC zone of influence like the other? We can automatically assume that we're going to be getting that 30-meter on top of the 30-meter buffer zone. That's my first question. And then the second follow-up question was him talking about 80 to 100 years having to go for permits. In the online, when they talk about transit control lands, it's clearly stated that change in our titles to ask for permits comes off our registry as soon as the subway is completely finished completion. The construction is completed as soon as operations start. So this is the first time I'm hearing 80 to 100 years. Maybe there's a little bit of confusion there. Stephen, can you explain that too?
Yeah, I can. And Ross, thanks for the follow-up. So two things, I guess, to answer your first question. The zone of influence is really sort of that area that will be the long-term sort of permitting zone where we need to do the screening. The earlier release, and that which is what you're talking about, is sort of during the construction phase. One of the pieces of sort of legislation that's been passed is called the Building Transit Faster Act, and it really is to implement a series of tools to enable sort of accelerated construction of the projects, and to help sort of ensure that they can track to the timelines. And so within the transit corridor lands designation, so that smaller area that I've been talking about the 30 meters, that is the area that will sort of be in place during the construction period, that those sort of tools that are available through the Building Transit Faster Act could be used. I'm not saying will be used by Metrolinx, but could be used in the event the normal approaches to project delivery are taking sort of longer and we need to accelerate the delivery. And so apologies for a little bit of confusion there on it. There are sort of two aspects to it. There is the during the construction phase, which is the narrower sort of corridor, and there is the during the sort of operating period, which is that 80 to 100 years, which is really that screening for making sure that sort of similar to a municipality sort of wanting to issue a permit to sort of have sort of understanding of what's happening. Metrolinx wants to be able to screen sort of the activities that are happening to make sure that the infrastructure is protected. Does that provide clarification? And I hope that sort of you can sort of go with a follow-on if there needs more clarification on that one.
So if I'm looking at, can you still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Sorry. So if I'm looking at the alignment on either side of the tunnels, I can assume then there's going to be a 30-meter area that's going to be within this 80 to 100 year. It's part of the it's part of the corridor, like the main corridor. And then the other extra 30 meters is going to be the one that's going to change after operation if you do put it in place.
No, it's the other way around. So the 60 meters is sort of in perpetuity. The narrower band is during the construction period. And the narrower band is specific to the tools of the Building Transit Faster Act, which. But
the narrower band is on the outside. It's that 30 meters on the outside of the tunnel, right? On the outside of the perimeter. Like if I'm looking at a diagram and I've got the tunnel in the middle, and then I have the TTC zone of influence, the outer band is the 30-meter buffer zone you're talking about. The only reason why I'm asking this is because I'm trying to figure out how many homes are going to be really affected by this. How is Holy Cross Cemetery going to be affected by this? How does this is an outside question for Holy Cross. I know I have land, I have plots, family plots there at Holy Cross, and I owned that land, those plots, but I have to look. I don't know. Do I own all the way down? Do each of those plots own land? Are they affected by this transit land corridor that goes into this Holy Cross Cemetery? Because it's going to be a minimum 138 meters wide, I think, from the sounds of it.
Yeah. So, Ross, I think because it's getting complicated to try and answer this question with the various zones that are there and what each zone represents, If it's okay with you, what I would like to do is sort of have the team sort of reach out and sort of with the use of maybe a map or a drawing, have a bit of a discussion with you on that. The transit corridor lands designation is what I would say is independent of land use. So it doesn't matter if it's a residential property, a commercial property, a park, or a cemetery, or any other type of land use. The transit corridor lands designation applies on all of the various land uses. And so we'll be engaging with each of the landowners to make sure that they understand what it means to them and how they're going to work within the parameters of the designation through the fullness of time.
So are the people who own land, their plots, are they all being contacted? Like, I'm not sure how that.
Yeah, we will be working through each of the landowners, and in the case of the cemetery, we'll be working through the Catholic cemeteries.
Each of the burials, each of the families that own land within that area will be contacted?
If that's determined the appropriate sort of steps and things that need to be done to ensure understanding, then the answer would be yes. But we would work with the cemetery just to make sure that the appropriate approach to communication is done.
And that's great. So we're just coming up to about 10 minutes here until we reach 8:30, and I understand that we have a few more questions in the Zoom room. So Ali, I want to try to squeeze in a few of these quick. So maybe you could let us know. Is there anything in the chat, or is there anybody else there who's got their hand up? Ali.
Thanks very much, James. We do have one more hand up and then one question from the chat. So Yakov has his hand up, and then I will finish with the chat question. So Yakov, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you. To confirm, Metrolinx expects that at the height of operation, residents can expect to hear a noise once every 100 seconds, meaning that we can expect a noise will be emitted basically hundreds of times per day during the subway's operational hours, which is, as I understand, 6 in the morning until 1:30 in the morning the following day, or in other words, well into the night. Has Metrolinx experimented to confirm the effects on residents and students of being exposed to the level of noise that Metrolinx claims will be emitted by passing trains? And if not, what is it exactly that confirms Metrolinx's claim that residents will not be bothered by the constant noise?
Okay, thanks for your question. I think what we'll do is we'll go to Sam on this one first. Maybe, Sam, you could speak to, I guess, just how intense these sounds and vibrations are going to be, because, I'd imagine there are studies out there about noise and vibration and their effects. But would this, with the noise and vibration being generated by the subway, would it be in that ballpark?
Yeah, great. And thanks, Yakov, for this question. Just to kind of give you an example, and this is something I think we'll look forward to showing and demonstrating when the Sound Lab is up and running, is that the sound is not continuous. It's very gradual, and then as the train passes by, you'll hit a peak, and then it'll decrease. So it's not going to be continuous. You'll hear, if you hear it, it'll be a very gradual increase and then a drop off. And again, we've said that the sound levels of this area will be about 30 decibels. In terms of where this comes from, this is the standard that is used on hundreds of transit projects, affecting thousands of residences and schools and things like that throughout the world. And so this is definitely a critical situation where we're running under single family homes in a mature neighborhood, and Metrolinx has made the commitment to go above and beyond what is a very accepted standard throughout the world for transit projects and groundboard noise from transit projects. These criteria were developed many years ago, again used on hundreds of projects, and were even recently updated in 2018. By the Federal Transit Administration. And that is really, these are intended for transit projects. So transit projects of all kinds have very frequent headways, and they often operate late into the night. So the standards are derived around, the impact and mitigating the impact at the most sensitive times, which is when people sleep. So I hope that answers your question. Like, these standards have been developed for that purpose to limit the impact on people as they sleep. And again, we're going above and beyond that standard in this case.
And thanks for that, Sam. And Maria Zinchenko, do you mind if I bring you in on this one? I just wanted to see if you had anything to add. I mean, given what Sam is saying about the very small, minute levels of noise and vibration that would be experienced through the tunnel segment of the route, like what can you say about our studies as they relate to noise and vibration, and the question that we'd received earlier about the effects on people? Would it hit that kind of threshold based on the standards that we follow?
So, thanks, James. Can you hear me? Just having trouble getting off of
mute.
mute.
Yeah, can hear you. Yeah, no problem.
I can add that, and Sam, please jump in and correct me if this is not quite right, that the standards that Sam spoke about, developed by the Federal Transit Administration in the United States, that have been in use for quite some time on hundreds of transit projects, are mindful of, again, sensitive time periods in people's lives, like when we sleep, and geared towards these, and are designed such that we assess the impacts during these most sensitive times and provide and address them accordingly if we find any potential to exceed the limits.
Thanks very much, Maria. I think if that's all for that one, then we're going to move on to a question from the chat. So the question is, I would like to know if there will be potential impacts for the home on the east side of the existing railway corridor, so the CN rail corridor, both during the subway construction and after the subway being in service. So I'm going to send this over to, there's a number of ways we could tackle this, but I think maybe Maria, do you want to start with some of the impacts that the EPR addendum investigated for the surface segment of the extension?
Sure, my pleasure, Ali. So I will start with construction impacts. When constructing, when doing any sort of surface construction, specifically along the surface segment of the subway, we'll be staying on the west side of the existing CN tracks. That being said, there may be some nuisance construction impacts like noise and vibration and construction-related temporary air quality impacts that may reach areas immediately to the east of the rail corridor. We discussed those impacts and ways we will address them during construction quite extensively in our project, environmental project report addendum. So I encourage you to take a look at the air quality and noise and vibration construction assessments, and again, the ways we'll address potential impacts and monitor effectiveness of mitigation measures. There is quite a wide range of mitigation measures that we could implement to ensure that construction nuisance is very limited, and these could be very simple, like for example for noise, laying out the construction areas such that any noise generating equipment like generators are placed away from sensitive receptors like residences. And for air quality, it's things like watering the construction areas and covering stockpiles to ensure that dust levels are kept to a minimum. We'll be working, our contractors will be developing detailed mitigation plans in advance of construction for our review and approval before construction starts. And we'll have a dedicated communications staff to keep in touch with the local communities throughout the construction period. Depending on there may be other impacts, such as traffic-related impacts, and again, these are also discussed in detail in the EPR addendum, where we do talk about the potential measures we could take to address the potential impacts. monitoring requirements and our detailed traffic control plans that will be developed cooperatively with the local municipalities to ensure that there's minimal impacts to existing traffic and transportation network users, and we keep people moving around construction areas.
Thank you, Maria. I just want to chime in and let everyone know that we're coming in on 8:30 here, and I just want to make sure that we'll have enough time to get to all of the questions. I've been sifting through the Engage forum, and it doesn't look like there's anything new that's been posted. So Ali and Zara in the Zoom room, are there any more chat questions, any more with their hand up?
Thanks very much, James. We don't have any hands up, or actually, we do have one hand up from Roz. I believe it's a new hand and not an old hand from earlier. So Roz, I'm going to unmute you now.
It's an old hand.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much.
Sorry.
And I'm just scrolling through the chat here to double check what we've got in here. We do have a couple chat questions. So the first chat question is, why is there no study on the psychological impact of this development on existing residents as part of the overall environmental study? Psychological safety of impacted people needs to be included in your study, which is totally absent right now. So we have talked about this in some of our past virtual open houses. So I'm going to send this one to Maria. So maybe you can just reiterate what is and is not included in the EPR addendum.
Sure, thank you, Ali. As outlined in the report, and as we've stated previously, we are following the Provincial Transit Project Assessment Process Regulation. That's Regulation 23108. Our regulator is the Provincial Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and there's an accompanying document to this regulation, which is a guide on how to conduct environmental assessments for the transit projects. So we follow these documents very closely and meet with the regulatory requirements and scope our environmental assessment studies per the accompanying guide to the regulation. Our environmental assessment is quite comprehensive. We look at the many aspects of the environment. That includes noise and vibration, and we've covered those quite extensively. Air quality, natural environment, socioeconomic and land use characteristics, cultural heritage, archaeology. You can find a very detailed description of existing conditions and our identification of potential impacts, as well as mitigation measures in our studies, which are published on the website. Mental health, health assessments or psychological health are not a typical component of associated with transit project environmental studies, because transit projects like the Yonge North Subway Extension have very predictable effects, which are readily mitigatable using conventional solutions that have been used previously and have been used elsewhere, such as safe loading slab track that we've discussed here earlier today. And for that reason, health impact assessments are not a typical component of environmental assessment studies. So this is not something that we'd undertake. Health impact assessments may be required as part of large, complex projects that have less predictable effects that may be difficult to mitigate, and such projects would be typically subject to federal legislation.
Thanks and Sam, I just wanted to check in with you and see if you had anything to add there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. And just to speak to this a little bit more, sound is sound, right? But noise is, the definition of noise is unwanted sound. And that's really the crux of where this criteria comes from. It's unwanted sound, and how that unwanted sound may affect people as they try to sleep. And so that is really where a lot of this criteria and standards come from, is trying to mitigate that impact on people and that potential unwanted sound and how that unwanted sound may affect their sleep and things like that. So that is how these standards were developed, and that is how these standards are, and why these standards are used on transit projects. It is to limit the impact. There's no direct effect of 35 decibels or even 30 decibels on people. That does not cause hearing loss. It does not cause any kind of adverse physical impacts. It's all about affecting sleep and how this affects people's daily livelihoods. So I think that kind of subject has been captured within the standards that have been developed and applied for transit projects around the world. And as noted many times, Metrolinx is committed to going kind of above and beyond those standards in this sensitive residential area.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sam. So my understanding is that after an evening of really in-depth discussion and lots of really great questions about our environmental project report and the project in general, we're down to our last question of the evening. So I'm going to throw it back down to Ali. I know you've got someone standing by there.
Thanks very much, James. This is actually a question from the chat. So the question is, where would the storage facility location be? The asker lives across the CN Railway at Yonge and Bantry intersection, and the map shows that it's parallel to the CN Railway. So just asking about the exact location of the train storage facility.
Stephen, we'll start with you. I see you flipping down your microphone.
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for the question. So the train storage facility, and this is a facility where the trains will essentially park overnight between sort of the running during the day and sort of parking there prior to their dispatch in the morning. So that train storage facility will be 3 parallel tracks running from approximately Bantry up to 16th Avenue. It will sit in the western portion of the existing CN right-of-way, and a portion of that sort of grassed boulevard or that grassed space between the CN right-of-way and the residential properties. So there won't be any encroachment into the residential properties or onto the municipal roads that exist along those communities. It will sit entirely within a portion of the CN right-of-way and that sort of buffer space just to the west of the CN right-of-way.
And Stephen, maybe a point that you could clarify for us, because it's often called a maintenance facility. But is there going to be any maintenance happening to the subway trains at this place?
The quick answer is no. This will be mainly, I shouldn't say mainly, this will be purely for storage, overnight storage. The maintenance activities on the trains, which are sort of essentially the noisy industrial operation, will be done by the TTC at primarily their Wilson Yard, which is on the other side of Line 1 over in the Downsview area.
All right, great. Well, it is 8:35, so we've gone just a little wee bit over, but we've covered a lot of ground tonight, as I said, and I hope everyone's found this educational, engaging, and has left you with some answered questions, because we certainly got a lot of them here this evening. So I would like to thank Ali and Zar for their work in our interactive Zoom room, taking questions from our panelists. I want to thank the presenters as well for their time and attention this evening, and doing their best to share the latest updates on the project. And I'd also like to thank you for joining us this evening and for asking us some thoughtful and sometimes tough questions. We like to get them all, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your evening, because your feedback is essential to the work we do, and it is always welcome and very much appreciated. I'm going to take another opportunity to remind you that if you would like to submit your comments on the EPR addendum to be reflected in that final report that Maria Zinchenko was talking about, you have until next Monday, that's March 14th, to submit your comments through Metrolinx Engage. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Yonge North Subway Extension newsletter to get the latest project updates sent right to your inbox and get the inside track on upcoming public events, just like this one. You can find the link on our website. It's metrolinx.com/Yonge Subway EXT. I'd like to wish you a good night and stay safe.
you.